Hey everybody, this is MC and Mad Talk the Civil War, episode 12, Shiloh. This was one of the bloodiest battles in the entire war. It was the bloodiest up to this point in 62. What is it, like number 3 or something? Because you got Antietam later and you got Gettysburg, which are bloodier. But it's up there, right, MC?
Well, it's the first really bloody battle, right? The other ones up to this point have been skirmishes, people dying here and there, but a days of total carnage. All right, this is the first one that people realize, okay, if both sides are serious, when both sides are serious about winning a battle, there's going to be literal carnage. Okay, when both sides are actually willing to stand and fight, okay, you're going to have to plow through. It's going to be a slugfest. So when people are truly competing, that's what this shows. This becomes the first time people realize, oh my God, people aren't going to be dying just by the hundreds for what they believe. They're going to be dying by the tens of thousands.
Yeah, absolutely. And just want to say hello to everybody in the chat. We got Jensen there, of course. Sherardi. Jacob's there for a little bit. It sounds like he has another screen he has to go watch. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the timeline here. March 1st to April 5th, Grant transports his Army of the West Tennessee, over 58,000 men, into southwest Tennessee. He establishes it at Pittsburgh Landing and awaits Buell's army. That's a pretty large force. What was this invading force meant to actually capture?
Well, at this point right now, they're basically going on to take Corinth and then take Memphis. All right, that's what this is going toward. You got to remember, this is part of the campaign to take the Mississippi. This is part of the Anaconda plan, split the Confederacy. All right, that's what this is all in preference to, right? And it's building on the Fort Donaldson and Fort Henry, for lack of a better term, disasters for the South, where the South gave up these forts and then now is giving movement into the Tennessee Valley for the Union forces.
Yeah, absolutely. And March 1st, Johnston transports 55,000 Confederates to Corinth to defend the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. He then advances on April 3rd towards Pittsburgh Landing. Rain and bad roads delay his advance.
Now, I want to say something about this.
All right.
Yes, it's delaying his advance, but it's also doing something else. All right. The Federals, because of the delay and because of the rain and the bad roads, right, think that they're secure. All right. They don't. This is a major mistake by Grant. He doesn't push out his cavalry to give him a warning. He doesn't know where Johnston is. He's made the assumption that Johnston is pulling back and has pulled back all the way to defend Corinth, which would give him plenty of time to land. Right? It's a mistake on his part, right, to anticipate. Okay, he thinks he knows what the Federal or the Confederates are doing, so he's not really pushing his cavalry to tell him exactly where the Federal or where the Confederates are. He's laying back and saying, okay, we're secure here, all right, without really knowing where the Confederates are. The Confederates now see a chance because he's at a landing. He doesn't have all of his forces in place. If they can come up to him, they can hit him by surprise and defeat Grant in detail. And that's what the idea is behind this. So the delay is doing two things. It's actually, it's hampering Johnston's delay of the attack, but it's also caused the Federals to be overly confident in that their position is secure. So it's a two-edged sword. Yes, it's harming Johnston in a certain regard, but it's also what allows him to be able to launch the surprise attack, which happens on April 6th.
Which almost works, but we'll get to that. On April 6th, he launches the surprise attack. He starts it They start the advance at 6:55 to 6:30 a.m. on April 6th, 1862. Federal patrols discover the Confederates in Fraley Field. Federal skirmish, then fall back. This is when Grant should have been alerted, right?
Oh, but now it's chaos.
Well, you're right.
This is absolute chaos at this point. All right. First of all, yes, you can have skirmishers or have alerted things. You started to see fights. The problem is that, okay, well, is it just a spoiling attack? You know, a few people throwing in some stuff that they then go away after they're beaten back? Or is this the entire military? Is this the entire Confederate force? Is this a major Confederate force? And I shouldn't say the entire, but is this a major Confederate force? The assumption early on is that, well, no, it's not a big deal. And as the attack continues, the routing begins because, okay, so it's just a few skirmishers, no big deal. No.
Well, yeah, this is almost like when Stonewall comes screaming out of the forest, right? It's the same thing. The Confederates come fucking screaming out of the forest and just start to roll up the flank. Well, actually, not even the flank; it's the rear guard, and they're invading the fucking camp.
So if you want, I'll pull up this.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll present you to everybody. But yeah, they just come screaming out of the woods. That's where you got the rebel yell.
This is what you have going on. All right, you have they've come up here, they've spread out in line. All right, and they've attacked, and they're attacking along the entire line. And it becomes obvious at this point that this is a general attack. Okay, and they begin to roll up the federal forces. Now, where's the fighting the most fierce? The fighting is the most fierce where the fighting takes place first, which is here in the center, right, and here over on the left flank. Why? Why isn't it on the right flank yet? It's not on the right flank yet because if you take a look at what Hardee and Breckinridge has to go through, or I mean not Hardee, but what the forces part of Bragg's forces, but definitely what Breckinridge's forces have to go through. You can see that there's not an easy thing. They have to come on this road here and then go through all of this swampy land, all right, yeah, because it's been raining and these things are swollen. And
yeah,
so
they're just creeks. They're easy to lead through usually, but as we had just mentioned, it had been raining for days.
Now,
so
Bragg has the easier chore because he's got this road to initially move his troops on, so then he can put them online. Breckinridge doesn't have that. So the initial part of the morning battles basically this is what you're dealing with. That makes sense?
Others are coming through the camp first. And then they're trying to press the attack. You have 6:30 to 9 a.m. Johnston maneuvers 8 brigades to overrun Prentice's camps, routing the Union division. Prentice, whatever. There's like 3 S's there. Fuck off. I can't pronounce that shit. I'm not a snake. Fuck.
All right. So Prentice begins to route Prentice's camp. Now, Prentice, if you notice, doesn't fall back very far, and you'll see this in the next.
Well, yeah, he falls back to what they end up calling the Hornet's Nest, and we'll get to why they call it that. But I'm pretty sure that's self-explanatory. It was a bloody fucking affair in the Hornet's Nest.
Yes.
7 to 10 a.m. Sherman's divisions repulse the Confederates, inflicting heavy casualties. Johnston sends 5 brigades to attack Sherman's left flank. Sherman falls back on whatever McClernand. What the fuck is with these Union names? Are they all Germans? On his division. Okay, so they do push Sherman back. They push back the whole Union Army, and they end up kind of bottlenecking them. But I think that's what creates the second day's events. to be
Well,
honest.
first of all, what's happening here is as they start to fight back and push them back, okay? First of all, Johnston has to push Sherman back because what's happening is as Bragg's initial attack makes headway, Sherman's here. Notice now you've got a bubble in the lines for the Confederates.
So it's bulging forward so they can be outflanked at that point.
Right. So if you let that continue, if you continue to push this line and they then begin to hold, which is what starts to happen, you run the risk of a flanking maneuver from Sherman through here. All right, not only cutting them off from a retreat, but also basically just rolling them up in piecemeal, being able to roll along this line. So you got to remember, Johnston's attacking, but what he doesn't know is he doesn't know what Grant has here. All right. He doesn't know that Buell is still a ways away. All right. Buell could just as easily be landing at Pittsburgh's Landing at this time, which then could reinforce Sherman for such a flanking maneuver. So he can't allow that to happen. So as a result, that's why he sends 5 freaking units, brigades to go crush Sherman so that he can maintain this line and not create a bulge in his own lines.
Which it works. I mean, the first at the beginning of the battle is looking pretty damn good for the Confederacy.
Yes, it does work. All right, as a matter of fact, it's heavy losses initially, but they're able to finally push Sherman back. Sherman then has to sit up there and fall back. Now, where does Sherman fall back to? He falls back to because he knows they have to protect Pittsburgh's Landing here. Pittsburgh's Landing is very important to them. Okay, and they have to protect it.
Yeah, absolutely. And
here's Pittsburgh's Landing, so people understand.
All right, so 10 to 11:30 a.m. Confederates assault Sherman and that McClellan dude on the Hamburg-Purdy Road, driving back the Union right flank. So they're driving them back on all fronts here. 8 to 9:30 a.m. Wallace's and Herbert's divisions march to the front. Is that Union divisions? I don't recognize those names, so I'm guessing they're Union divisions.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what ends up stiffening the line and slowing the progress here, right?
Well, it provides it basically stops Bragg. Okay, and Breckinridge. It's basically what stops the Bragg and Breckinridge is at it temporarily. All right, and saves the you can, as you're looking at the map, one thing should be obvious: the Union's left flank is secure. Why? Because it's against the Tennessee River.
Yeah, if you get too close, you have gunboats to contend with, which we'll see later in the timeline here.
Yes. All right. So with the left flank secure, then you just have to worry about, okay, what about what's going on the Union right flank or as the left flank for Johnston.
So while we're still in the morning of day one, if you're Grant, obviously you said he made a major mistake not sending out cavalry to scan the area. That would have been the first thing you would do, right? What else would you do to actually protect the camp so this even the day one wouldn't have happened?
Well, there's other than that, there's not really a whole lot you can do because you want to know where. The problem is you have to know where the Confederate forces were. What his mistake was is that he assumed that he already knew, and so he wasn't sending the cavalry out to ensure where that was. That fact alone is what causes this. All right, it's raining. You've already made the assumption. You're not sending your cavalry units out to find the Confederates. You've already assumed that the Confederates are in corner. Okay, so that was a mistake. You're assuming what the Confederacy is going to do, what the Confederate units are going to do. You've made an assumption. It was a bad assumption. So what else could they have done? There's not really a whole lot more they could have done because of that one assumption. Because they weren't warned. All right, those camps were unprepared for a fight. Now, if you're preparing for a fight, if you're expecting to have to fight, then well, hell, What you've done is that night, instead of producing camp, you've told them, okay, you've got to make it a fortified camp. You got to make fortified position. You're digging ditches. You're digging freaking trenches, and you're throwing up breastworks. There were no breastworks. This was an open camp.
They were just sitting ducks.
Yeah, basically. Initially, yeah.
All right, so let's see, where are we? We're at okay. No, I thought we were at 9 to 10:30 still. Johnston, hearing that his right flank is threatened, orders Chalmers and Jackson's brigades. That's not Stonewall Jackson, by the way. This is in the west. To assault the federal left with Breckinridge in support. And then 11 to noon, Confederates make contact with the Federals across the eastern Corinth Road. Federals repulse the attacks. And that's really day one can be boiled down to the Confederates not.
This is what happens in the second one. Let me go to the next map. Okay, because the morning is now basically over. Here's what you're going to be dealing with in the afternoon.
All right, yeah. As you pull that up, I'm gonna I'll start presenting you again. I'm gonna go ahead and check the chat.
That's not the one I want. So. Stop sharing. Stop sharing. This is the one I want. Much better.
Okay, and like I said, they start to bottleneck Union, but the Union has gunboats in the Tennessee River, and those gunboats are going to end up firing on their own camp because the Confederates now hold the camp, right?
Well, the camp is right here. What's left of the camp is right here, right? Now, one thing that we didn't talk about that happens to the Southerners is as they roll through this camp here, they delay.
Yeah, they start eating the breakfast like that was cooking and shit. It's ridiculous. I'd be pissed.
And they basically stop and have breakfast. They get some warm food in them because Johnston has been pushing them at night. All right, they are tired. They are cold. They are wet. They've been getting rained on during this movement. Okay, and they haven't been able to get a hot meal. And here's breakfast cooking. So they kind of mingle here before their officers are able to form them back in a position again for the attack. The attack.
And that's an issue. If they would have just kept rolling through, they might have actually been able to push the Union all the way to Pittsburgh Landing and maybe forced a general retreat. But they don't. They stall. They eat.
Right. And so you end up with this situation where Prentiss is able to actually reform his lines along with Sherman along this line initially. And this becomes the battle point for the afternoon. And you'll as you read through the timeline, you'll see that.
All right. Hey, how you doing, Joshua? Welcome. Memes, how are you? All right, let's go back over here to the timeline. We are at 11 to 1. Yeah, 11 to 1 p.m. Chalmers and Jackson assault Stewart, but Confederates stall. Federal left holds against all attacks. If they could have rolled up the left flank, it would have been a totally different story, would it not?
It definitely would have given them a chance to push them and trap them at Pittsburgh's Landing, all right, where they couldn't recover and they couldn't dig in. It definitely would have made a much more difficult defensive perimeter if they could have set up there. Because at this point in time now, you got to remember these troops. The landing is over here, right? If they lose this landing, let me get in there. If they lose this landing here, if they lose this, they have nowhere to fall back. All right, then it's just a general retreat along these lines, hoping that you can get to the gunboats to get back across the river to safety. All right, they've come from over here to get into this position. Now you got to give it all back. All right, so they could have been totally pushed out of position for literally no gain, and it would have had to cede the entire field to the Confederacy.
Yeah, and that looks like, how many batteries of artillery is that? Because that looks like a lot of artillery right there.
I'm not sure what the total number is, but it is a lot of artillery. And they would have captured all of it. South would have.
Yeah, and that would have been a major boon to the Army of the Tennessee for sure.
Well, if nothing else, it could have been used for defensive positions that get overrun later on, for sure.
But yeah, okay. So, all right. Noon to 2:30 p.m. Sherman and that fucking German guy. I know he's not German. That's probably Irish, actually. Counterattack, driving the Confederates south. But weakened by losses, the Federals withdraw across the Tillman branch. So even though they start driving the Confederacy back, they still withdraw. What's up with that?
They're out of position. You're opening a gap here. Okay, you got to remember what when you don't have the forces here, another push here would have collapsed that entire left, which would have left Prentiss surrounded. And so this is what they're talking about. They're talking about going back across this creek.
So, I mean, at this point, there's still, even though the Confederacy started to get pushed back in there by Sherman, they're still gaining ground at this point. That's going to change on day 2, which we could skip day 2 if you want.
No, we're not skipping day 2. All right. But what you have now is this part is holding. Prentiss is holding, and the Hornets' Nest is beating back wave after wave. Johnston orders 15 attacks here. 15 assaults into the Hornets' Nest.
How many casualties were there? I mean, they were standing on bodies at that point, right? I mean, they had no breastworks, but they had bodies.
Bodies are picking up because this is heavily wooded area. Okay, and the battle is taken. It is so fierce that the trees are just getting blown apart and they're being cut down. Eventually, Prentiss has to give up because you got to remember what they're doing at this point is they're being told to hold so that Grant can create a true defensive line, all right, with the artillery and everything else.
Oh yeah, did the Confederates have any artillery on the field? I don't see any artillery.
Well, the problem, they do have artillery, but the problem is as you move forward, you've got to limber the artillery back up and move it back into position. Artillery at this point in the battlefield is very good, all right. Generally, however, in the defense, it's because it's so difficult to unlimber it and get it ready for battle right away. All right. Horse artillery is very effective in being able to do this because they can move it very quickly from point A to point B. But in the attack, all right, artillery is quite limited unless you've had time to move it into a position where it can be used in the attack.
And you also have reinforcements from Wallace and Nielsen. Nielsen's crossing into Pittsburgh Landing, and Wallace is coming down from the north, right?
Right. You've got Wallace coming in through here. All right, basically reinforcing these lines in a defensive manner to rebuild these lines, actually put up breastworks, make it impenetrable now. And of course, what's left of Prentiss's division and Wallace are eventually forced back into coming into these lines. But these lines now exist. They're not coming back just into an area. They are coming into prepared positions.
Well, no, and it looks like Hardee's left flank is up in the air over here, and it looks like Sherman, if he wouldn't have retreated, could have probably rolled up the line.
Okay, but by doing so, Sherman then would come from this point to out here, at which point he could have been isolated. Okay,
that's a very good point.
And that's what the concern was. Okay, I mean that's why. Yeah, okay, we drove back we did a counterattack to a point, but how powerful is that counterattack? Can I continue the counterattack? The reality is that the fighting was so fierce that he didn't feel he could continue the counterattack with the troops that he had.
Is there any way Hardee could have extended his line further left and maybe tried to take the left flank of Grant's?
Okay, if he had done that, he'd have actually been. If he did it too soon, he actually would have ended up putting himself in a position where he is pinchered between Wallace on this flank and actually Sherman on this one, and they could have defeated him in detail.
Fair enough. This is why I do the show with you, because you know military tactics. So,
I mean, Grant at this point, I mean, later on in that evening, you know, Sherman runs into Grant, and Grant is sitting basically whittling, which is one of the things that he did do. And he said, we had the devil's afternoon, you know, that devil's day. He said, yep, whip him tomorrow.
You're an asshole. But anyway.
That's just who Grant was. You got to understand who these players are.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Noon to 3:30 p.m. Gibson's Confederates assault the Federal Center 3 times and repulse. Confederates come under murderous fires in an impenetrable oak thicket. 1 to 4 p.m. Johnston orders attack against the Federal left, forcing them back. Johnston is then killed. Beauregard takes command. Herbert's division again stalls Confederates, but then retires towards Pittsburgh Landing. Let's talk a little bit about Johnston being killed. How much of a loss was that to the Army of the Tennessee?
They lost the only decent commander they had in the West. You want to know the truth? That was you had no more commanders in the left that were worth a damn. All right.
Yeah.
With the exception of the cavalry officers, but they were limited. Right.
And doesn't Beauregard end up back in the Army in Northern Virginia? Also, they pull him from the West.
Different Beauregard.
Oh, okay, fair enough. A lot of these guys have the same names.
Yes, and that's the name Johnston is used a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Johnstons in the battles, both on the fact there's Johnstons in the Confederacy and in the Indian Union, if you really get into it. But Johnston himself was highly respected on both sides as being an intelligent commander, as being one of the best commanders, if not the best field commander that the South has, even over Lee.
Really?
Yes, at this point. And his death is a heavy, heavy blow. But let's talk about this for a moment. All right, Johnston dies on the field because he takes a bullet in the leg, and he basically they go, "Your general, you're wounded," and he goes, "Yes, seriously." You know, however, he could have been saved if people had realized how to apply a tourniquet, which becomes part of the training later on, but isn't normally part of the training for how to deal with these kind of wounds. And in fact, the reason that there's no one who knows how to put a tourniquet on is because Johnson has actually sent his personal surgeon to go help, all right, deal with the casualties, which included a large contingent of Union casualties, all right, and he's having them work on the Union soldiers rather than be present for this part of the battle. And this is one of the reasons why he died. Is he basically bleeds out. He did not have to die. If people would have realized how to put a tourniquet on, okay, a tourniquet, let me explain something to people so that they understand something about a tourniquet. A tourniquet is there to staunch the blood flow. Yes. However, if you put a tourniquet on and you just leave it on, just as tight as you possibly can, basically you cut off all blood flow to the lower part of the extremity, and therefore you've got to cut it off anyway. Okay. So what you do with a tourniquet is you put it on so that it's enough so that it cuts off the blood flow, but then every now and then you have to know to loosen it a little bit to let that blood flow go back in. Yes, does it increase blood loss temporarily? Yeah, it will increase blood loss from that area, but when you then you have to tighten it back down again. But if you don't do that, you'll basically kill the limb. You'll basically cause the limb to become necrotic, and you will end up with that gangrene. So what you have to do is you keep it tight most of the time, but every so often you let it loose a little bit so that the blood can flow, so that the tissue doesn't die, to prevent massive tissue loss. Okay, this is what they didn't know. They knew that if you strapped it on there, you could create a tourniquet, but they didn't know that the process of letting it go, let a little blood flow go, stop it, let a little blood flow go, stop it. If his surgeon was there, all right, at that point, they could have probably operated, sewn up what was necessary from the damaged artery, and probably even saved his life, if not his leg as well.
Are you saying he died because he was merciful? Because you said he was his surgeon was out helping Union troops.
Yeah, I'm sorry saying that he died because he was having his surgeon personally attend somebody else. And yes, they were Union troops.
Well, that tells you one thing: don't ever help the fucking enemy. Um, anyway. Oh, I told her already I try not to cuss too much. I should knock it off. Yeah, she has her kids watch this so they can learn some history. So I'll try and be better at that, Sherardy, if you're still in the chat.
This is something that's happening across both lines. This is not a unique event, although it's unique in regards to the fact that he dies as a result of it. All right, but both forces, their surgeons, their medics, if you want to look at it from our perspective, all right, are constantly basically serving both sides, and this creates the dynamic that you have with the medic units today. They will help both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. So the loss. I mean, do you want to get into all that after we're done with the timeline? Because we're almost at day 2. Okay.
Let's get into that after.
Okay. All right. So Johnson killed. Okay. 3 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. Sherman and you know who prevent Confederates from crossing Tillman Branch, but retire to defend the Hamburg-Savannah Road so that Wallace's division can come up. So they stop them from crossing Tillman, but then they fall back so the Confederates can cross Tillman. It just seems like the Union is giving ground even when they win a I don't know, you wouldn't call it a battle, but a scrimmage.
What's important about this, okay, to understand, is the first part of the battle in the morning was an absolute rout they were running. Okay, the Union troops were running. Now what you're seeing is you're seeing strategic retreats back into, all right, better and better prepared positions. Additionally, where they're falling back is giving them, for whatever reason, some kind of tactical advantage that they're now applying. Right?
Have they fallen back out of the hornet's nest by this point?
No, they have not.
Okay.
Okay. At this point in time they had not been pushed out of the hornet's nest.
Because I think in day 2 the Confederates hold the hornet's nest, if I remember correctly. But yes. Yeah, okay. I had my head in an English comp book all day yesterday, so I didn't get to do as much research as I wanted to on this. Because Shiloh was a pretty big deal at the time, and Grant got a lot of flack for this, but we'll get to that after we're done with the timeline. Okay. 7 p.m. That's a big gap. What are they doing in that gap? 5:30 to 7?
They're trying to eat. They've been fighting all day. There's basically a lull in the battle.
So it wasn't necessarily like hey, we're all gonna take a fucking dinner break, guys. Let's just chill. It was just by necessity. The men were so exhausted.
Yeah, men are exhausted. You now have a lull in the battle. All right. At this point, Prentiss basically it has now retreated from the hornet's nest. All right, but it's been an intentional movement. All right, not a rout. And it prevented the forces, the Confederate forces, all right, from actually getting to Pittsburgh's Landing, all right, and this is critical.
Well, if McClellan would have been leading the Army of the Tennessee instead of Grant, they would have kept retreating, wouldn't they?
Yep. They would have just been one big launch to retreat. They would have retreated straight to Pittsburgh Landing, and then they would have crossed back across.
That's what I was just thinking about. I was like, because generals matter, especially after Johnston dies, and then it goes to Beauregard. But all right,
goes to Beauregard and your favorite general.
Okay, so at night, Buell's troop file in on the Union left. Crittenden deploys in the center with McCook in the support. Nielsen is ferried across the river, and federal gunboats open fire into captured federal camps.
Okay.
That's the end of day 1.
Why is this important? All right, especially that last bit. The reason it's important is because the Confederacy, the Confederates, right, are in the camp. Yeah, they're trying to basically consolidate their lines, but they're not able to sleep. All right, they're not secure because they're getting shelled. So it's that they're not, when the morning comes the next day, it's not the Federals when they attack, right, as they're getting prepared to do. Not only is it a surprise, but it's also they're falling upon troops that have not had a lot of sleep. They're still exhausted from the day before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you get shelled all night. You're not going to get any darn sleep. Besides, you've been marching for, what was it, 3 days it took for them to get in position before the surprise assault? The Confederates are fucking zombified by this point, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, in the Union, they had plenty of rest. It's just, you know, they had lots of losses at the beginning of that battle and a lot of captured troops, I would imagine, right?
Yes. And so you end up with the next day's battle, which is this one right
Busy are you?
All right, yeah, if you want to go over the map a little bit first, or I can go into the timeline, it's up to you how you want to do it.
Go ahead and go to the timeline while I'm getting ready to pull.
All right. So day 2, April 7th, 1862, 7 to 9 a.m., Wallace drives Confederates from Jones Field. Also at the same time, Grant and Buell advance, skirmishing light as majority of Confederates retired south of the Hamburg-Purdy Road during the night. So the Confederates knew a counterattack was coming. They had already repositioned, mainly probably because of those gunboats, right? I wouldn't be chilling.
Like getting shelled. So basically now, all right, what you see now is you're seeing the counterattack on the next day, and this is what happens. First of all, you've got the resupply from Wallace here, the resupport that came in late from Wallace, right? But you've also now got all of these areas have been resupplied, and they're reinforced with more men. Right?
Well, yeah, and like I was saying, how they bottlenecked the Union into falling back around Pittsburgh Landing. The Union now has a concentrated center that they could just assault the Confederates with.
One of the things about good interior lines is you're able to move your troops interiorly where the enemy can't. So you can now put your troops in a position where, in a small area, you have more troops than they do in a significant manner.
It was 55 to 58,000. 55,000 for the Confederates, 58 for the Union. But when you're doing an assault, even if it's a surprise attack, you end up losing more troops than the defenders.
You can, and that's usually what happens. The normal way that they told us when we were doing this study is that if you're in an attack on an expected position, a defensive position, if it's a hasty position, expect losses to be 3 to 1. Expect you to have 3 to 1 losses to the enemy.
Deserve a lot of credit.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the Union loses a lot of forces in this battle as well.
Well, yes, but what happens is once a rout happens, then almost all the losses end up on the defender. If the defender gets routed, it becomes a total loss. So basically, you see a start early on in the morning. Notice 5 a.m. they kick off this battle. All right, and they begin the attack, and it's along the entire line, but it's focused because of the interior lines. Whatever looks weakest, if it looks like it's wavering at all, Grant is able to move troops from one side into the other to push that line. And it's an amazing, believe it or not, Beauregard does an amazing job of keeping them in line, of not allowing an area to totally disintegrate to where they don't keep a line together. And so as they start to get pushed back, Beauregard is actually able to keep a steady line. He has to fall back, yes, but he's able to fall back without it being a rout.
Yeah, they called this a Union victory. They called this a Union victory, but the fact remains that the Army of the Tennessee is not beaten in piecemeal. It's not. Well,
it is captured. Not destroyed, and it's not captured. You're correct.
But I'll go down the timeline a little bit more because day 2 is a lot shorter compared to day 1. Also at 7 to 9 a.m., Grant and Buell. Okay, advance. I said that. All right. 9 to 11 a.m., Nielsen advances through Wickers and Sarah Bell's fields. Sheridan advances in center, but is stalled in the Hornet's Nest. This time, the Confederates hold the Hornet's Nest. Correct?
Yes, that major thicket is now full of Confederates shooting at the Union troops who had abandoned it. This is what happens when other people take over your abandoned lines. They can now be used against you, which is exactly what happened.
And the Hornet's Nest, I can't understate the carnage that happened there. I mean, we can't do, we're just talking about the battles. We can't show you like a documentary can. But look up History Channel's Civil War documentaries, and they'll tell you and show you dramatizations of the Hornet's Nest. And it was a fucking horrible thing. It was almost like a World War I trench war at that point with the bodies stacked up. It was bad.
It was getting to that point, yeah. And that's something that one of the things about the Civil War in general is it does give rise to what's going to happen when it comes to trench warfare. And you'll see it more when we get to Petersburg. But at this point, it's already the absolute carnage, the death that is happening in the battle. All right, is beginning now to say, okay, well, if you're really fighting, if these people are really, both sides are intent on winning, this will be the result. You will have mass death. You will have mass carnage. The mini ball is a devastating weapon at this time frame. It's an ounce of lead flying through the air. All right, when it hits a bone, it doesn't break the bone, it doesn't penetrate the bone, and absolutely shatters it in little itty bits. All right, this is one of the reasons why many people think that there were a lot of amputations were due to the fact that they just didn't know any better. And to some extent that's true, but the main reason is because when it hits an arm, when that mini ball hits an arm, it isn't just breaking that bone. It is literally taking a massive chunk out of that bone that can't ever be found again. And they don't know how to rebuild this. They just don't know how to rebuild bone structure.
Yeah, I know, and that's how you end up with Stonewall Jackson having his arm be buried. they even, they had to amputate after he got shot. He ended up surviving for another 3 or 4 days before he died from gangrene.
He survived a couple of weeks.
Oh, a couple of weeks. Okay, fair enough.
He survived several weeks. They didn't think he was going to die. They actually thought that they didn't realize that this wound was going to be fatal to them.
Yeah, and Lee said, you lost your left arm, I lost my right. But anyway, we haven't even gotten that far. We're talking about a different general dying today, Johnston. But yeah, and once again, is just the concentration of Union troops and the ability to push through the center and to roll the Confederates back on day 2 is quite startling.
The other thing that you're not given a lot of credit for is, remember, the gunboats don't just stay here. Okay, they come along this whole area and they make holding these areas internally here absolutely untenable. Because if they stay there, they just get the shit shelled out of them. Right? So they're going to be forced out of position, at least down to here anyway, because those gunboats can basically shell at will.
So at what point, or no, I'll go in here a little bit more. All right. 9 to 10 a.m. Breckinridge and Hardee counterattack Nielsen's right flank and force the Federal left back into the Wicker field. The Confederates are fighting back and making gains still. But, I mean, if you're only forcing the right flank back, you end up, like we said before, you're going to end up getting outflanked, right? So you end up having to retire.
They go back into here saying, okay, we're gonna take this area here, and what do? You put you get right here, whether you're going to get shelled, and you get whacked again.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely see your point.
You can't. What Beauregard was trying to do at this point is he's trying to relieve pressure from his left by going to the right and possibly threatening through here. But the problem is as you go through here, you now open up yourself to this kind of gunfire from the gunboat.
Yeah. All right. So 9 at the same time, 9 to 11 a.m. McCook crosses the Tillman branch and engages Breckinridge's left. And then 10:30 to noon, Sherman, that one guy, and Hurlburt crossed Tillman branch to join Wallace in fighting against Pope and Bragg on the Confederate left. I think it's really interesting how Bragg's division starts in the middle and then he switches to the left flank during the night. I'm guessing that was Beauregard that told them to do that.
Well, they're trying to. Okay, you got to really understand something about how these battles are going. Not only are the troops intermingling to an extent, but you've also got to reassess, all right, who's in charge of what, when, and where. And when you lose commanders, all right, you're going to shuffle your commanders at night to sit there and go, okay, I think this group needs leadership over here. I'm going to move you over to here for this leadership because whoever was leading them before has been killed. Excuse me.
Or promoted, like Beauregard, field promotion.
Well, yeah, you could look at it as a promotion in a certain sense, but the fact is that you're getting promoted because people are dying. All right, and so to take over, if you get promoted, if you're saying, okay, well now I'm in charge of everything, then somebody else is going to have to move into that position to take control of your troops that you were a part of it. So yes, that's also an aspect of it.
Yeah, all right. So we're almost done with this, so I'm just going to read through the rest of it.
Okay.
All right, so 10:30 to noon, Confederates flanked by Wallace and forced to retire to the Hamburg-Purdy Road. Noon to 2 p.m. Reinforced, Nielsen and Sheridan advanced, forcing Beauregard's right flank to retreat south to the Hamburg and Purdy Road. Noon to 2 p.m., McCook slams into Bragg at Walter Oak Pond. Beauregard counterattacks, halting McCook. With the left under pressure, Beauregard is forced to retire. 2 to 4 p.m., Breckinridge, supported by massed artillery south of Shiloh Branch Ravine, checks Union advance, and Confederates retire from the field. Federals reclaim possession of the field, and there we go. Yeah, it doesn't say the actual casualty amount. So if you want to go on in some of the other aspects here, since we're done with the timeline, I'll go ahead and search for the casualty amount real quick.
Okay, so basically what's happened is he's getting pushed back all the way to here. All right, at which point they're able to Beauregard is able to mass his artillery to actually stop, at least temporarily. In other words, he's stopping them from totally overrunning his forces. So now he can pull back along these two major roadways, all right, so that he can then consolidate at night and then retreat finally, right? That's what he's able to do. So it prevents a Confederate route at that point, right? But you'll also notice where he's pulling away from is he's pulling away from the Tennessee River. He's pulling away from the power of those gunboats, which have a lot of artillery. It's very powerful. It can do a lot of devastating damage if it can get close enough. This has been Hardee. Now Hardee has been fighting ferociously, all right, this entire time, and his troops have really been decimated. But he's actually able to at times actually push the Union forces back, at least temporarily, all right, to give some relief to what's going on in the Hornets' Nest. But it's only a temporary.
All right. Yeah, no, and I want you to continue. But, all right, so casualties. The cost of victory was high. More than 13,000 of Grant's and Buell's approximately 62,000 troops were killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Of the 45,000 Confederates engaged, there were more than 10,000 casualties. The Confederacy had less casualties, but the thing is, the Confederacy can't afford these casualties. The North can.
Well, the Confederacy has the problem with the Confederacy is they can't replace it nearly as quickly. All right, that's the reality. All right, you're dealing with you're dealing with the situation as it exists. All right, the Union has a far larger pool of manpower to draw upon. Okay, and when the other problem, of course, with the South is their rail system. And this is something that's not talked about, is while you could say that the South has the interior lines, right, because everybody's flowing into the South. The problem is that the Confederacy, the railway system has no standardization. So literally, trains going from one state to another at certain points have to literally stop because the gauge on these two railroads is different.
Not only that, but they were running the trains so much that they were breaking their own rails, and they couldn't even really fix it. I mean, this isn't later when Sherman is making the freaking railroad tie or whatever, the southern neck tie, whatever they fucking called it, when he would heat up the rails and bend them. This wasn't then. It was just the Confederacy was running the trains so damn much.
They both sides do that. All right, both sides will tear up railroads to try and prevent the other side from movement, and basically heat the rails, and then especially the cavalry units. All right, and then bend them. The problem, of course, is with the Union. Is the Union has plenty of steel. It's not as unfathomable for them to go, okay, we need X amount of more railroad uh, uh, rails to be sent down to us, right? They had plenty of steel. They could replace these rails. The South, however, has a problem. They don't have a lot of steel. They don't have a lot of these resources, all right, to be able to rebuild these railroads like the Union can. This is the same problem that they have with the gunboats and the ironclads. Is they can't just build ironclads willy-nilly like the Union can.
Instead of Lee's attempt to take DC, he should have sacked Pittsburgh. Seriously, that would have been a much better idea, right?
No, because while he could sack it, he couldn't keep it.
Yeah, but you burn the city to the ground and you take all their fucking steel. Fuck them.
Well, you wouldn't take you would take what steel you could, but how long would it be before they had the furnaces back online and they'd rebuilt their steel? You wouldn't take it.
No, I'm saying you burn Pittsburgh. You burn it to the ground.
You could burn it to the ground, but they're still going to rebuild it. It's not like
Then we go burn it down. Then we go burn it again.
It's not like the Romans taking Carthage, where you salt the earth and they can never grow there again.
Yes, okay? That's what we do.
Okay,
so I've had it with these Yankees. Try to start burning and pillaging.
You could have done that, and you would have guaranteed that it wouldn't have worked. Number one, because you couldn't have stayed there, and you would have been immediately surrounded if you attempted to do it.
Oh, I would have just had General Forrest do it for me. He can handle it. He can move in and out, burn the whole place down.
Forrest was not invincible. Okay,
I know.
Bedford Forrest, all right, could do all this stuff at a whim. In fact, you'll when we get to later battles. In fact, this battle here, Forrest is at this battle. Did you know that?
No, actually. What division was he under?
I'm not sure which division he was under, but in fact, the last shot of the war of this battle is him riding away, holding a freaking a Union soldier as a shield as he's riding back.
That is okay. Come on, how badass is that? That's like kind of an action movie.
The last shots of the war are shot at him fleeing with a Union soldier being used, and he throws him. He doesn't keep him as a captured prisoner, but he does.
He throws him off the horse. I'm done with you, buddy. Get out of here.
I got away, so I'm good. But yes, for it's not like Nathan Bedford Forrest is invincible.
Oh, I know. It was mainly a joke, but that is hilarious. I didn't know that story. That's really interesting. But okay, so the implications of this battle are Grant is heavily scrutinized, especially in the Northern papers, as being unprepared and really a shit general, right?
What happens at this point is he gives voice to Halleck, who hates his guts. Okay, and Halleck is his superior, but the fact that the Grant was getting the press and people were looking at Grant as, oh, he's the master of this. We need to promote him. Halleck is very jealous of Grant's success, and this gives him the opportunity to, basically tarnish the star of Grant and saying, well, he's He wasn't what everyone thinks he is. He really is a drinking, drunken clod. You have to understand that that's why. And this gives Halleck the chance to actually replace Grant, which is what he does temporarily.
And then Grant almost quits over that, right?
Grant does think about resigning his commission and returning, and it's actually Sherman that convinces him, saying, no, we need you. Don't retire. You'll be put back in charge of a unit. All right, I'm going to stand by you. Don't worry. I'll get you back into this.
Well, I always knew I hated Sherman.
Which is another problem that you have. When I was talking about the 2D caricatures of the enemy,
I know.
I'm referring to you in this case.
But if you look at the Confederacy, this was their best chance to actually capture the army. I don't remember what they called the Union called the army in the West, but this was the best chance they had to actually capture it. Huh?
This was their best chance of actually winning a battle. Because after this, they're always completely outnumbered, and as long as someone is able to continue battle maneuver, all right. If they try to stop to give battle, basically the Union forces, the power of the Union forces are such that any stationary battle would be a temporary win for them. And they can't afford. See, many people don't realize that the Confederates couldn't afford to get pinned down, because if they did, they'd be destroyed. Right? If at any point in time you're able to hold the enemy, to fix the enemy in a position, the Union forces that could be brought to bear were so overwhelming that you would be completely destroyed.
Vicksburg is example A.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, it is the best example, the most glaring example of what happens. But the South can't afford not to try and fight battles as well. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They have to fight, but if they stand and fight for any length of time, they'll get destroyed.
Well, that's one thing I didn't really understand about Shiloh is why they withdrew and actually fell back onto Corinth.
You read the casualty reports and you'll realize, oh my God, if this battle continued, they wouldn't exist anymore. And the Union still would have a good 30,000 troops with literally no one between them and Vicksburg and them and taking the South. Memphis would have fallen easily at that point.
What's the long-term implication of Johnston being killed one more time before we end up? We're hitting the hour mark. So
the ramifications of that are they've lost the best Western field commander, and unfortunately, they've now, by extension, have to promote two of the worst. All right.
Yeah.
One of which is Bragg.
I fucking hate Bragg.
All right. So the implications are is you no longer have the best commander who knows when to fight. Beauregard, for all of his abilities, right? He's limited in that he doesn't know when the best time to fight is. He didn't have the innate knowledge of I can surprise the enemy here and get a good push going on. Johnson had that natural ability. He had the ability to maneuver, understood how to maneuver with terrain in order to force the enemy to deal with him on his terms generally. Now, Grant, it would have been more of a chess match with Grant than it is with Beauregard. At this point in time, the South is never on the offensive. It's the last Western offensive, for the most part, that the South has the rest of the war.
Yeah, absolutely. And this whole plan was Johnston's plan, right? This didn't come from, because later on Lincoln starts to meddle with actual war plans. But this didn't come from Jefferson Davis. This was Johnston's plan, and it damn near worked. It's still
even if Johnson would have won or survived, all right, and had actually won this battle. I still don't think he necessarily would have won the battle, because I think that the attempt to keep on pressing wasn't really possible at that point, right? Even when he comes out of the battle. But even if he would have pushed Grant back across there, the one thing it would have done is got Grant relieved. Well, that it gets Grant relieved anyway. Okay, so that's no change. You still don't change the correlation of forces. You do prevent the Union movement to an extent, but it's only a temporary delay. At best, it would have only been a temporary delay and a temporary movement that's going to come later anyway. All right. So in reality, I really think that if Johnston would have survived, it would have. He had a chance at possibly sometime later, all right, turning the tables, pulling a Robert E. Lee out of the hat. But the difference is that Robert E. Lee was facing the worst of the Union generals. All right, the opposite was for Johnston. Johnston would have just ran in headlong at some point and gotten destroyed by Grant. It may have delayed things, but in some ways, if Johnston would have survived this battle, it's very possible, right, that he tries to meet Grant at another point and is totally destroyed, and Vicksburg falls sooner.
Interesting. What's the next battle that we're going on to? I don't have the timeline thing open anymore.
Well, I think you need to go back to you need to return back to the east.
I think so as well. All right, and Pinoid, we had more people watching a little bit ago. The history show is probably my least favorite out of everybody, but I enjoy doing it, and I think somebody needs to break down these battles. I don't see very many YouTubers doing it, so that's why we do it. Anything else, MC, or are we about done?
No, I think we're done for today. I thought it was a good, a good explanation of what went on in Shiloh.
Yeah, no, and I like that timeline much better than the last timeline that we were using. So I'm going to try and find that website again for the next battle. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I'll try not to cuss as much on these episodes, Sherardy. That way your kids could watch without me dropping an F-bomb every 2 minutes. We'll be back on the Red Eye tomorrow. And yes, I will talk about the Kavanaugh confirmation because I haven't touched on that yet. I had shit I had to do yesterday. Thank you very much. Good night. Good luck. And don't move to France.